Thanks for everyone for joining us so promptly today. We had about 45 registered for this session, so it's great to see so many of you here. We may just have a couple more joining us throughout, but given that you're all here so promptly, I think I will hand over to yourself, Kasim, to kick us off.
Uh, th Thank you, Abby. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Energy Saving Technology and Funding Training session, which is being delivered to you as part of the Camden and Brent Business Climate Challenge. This is the third in a series of training sessions being delivered through the Business Challenge, with the intention of providing businesses such as yourselves with tools and the knowledge base to reduce operational energy and carbon emissions across your business operations. Before we move into the agenda, just wanted to raise a couple of quick housekeeping notes. The session will be recorded for future sharing and use. If you do find that your connection does drop out during the call, please feel welcome to rejoin the call and we'll add you back in. Please also, as Abby mentioned, please also try to keep your microphones muted throughout the call. We will have a Q&A session towards the end of the call. We will invite businesses to ask any questions that they have about the training or any content that we've covered in today's training session. And yes, for the purpose of time, if you sorry, there's somebody just. Oh, sorry, I thought I'd heard someone in the background there. No worries. I was just going to say, for the purposes of time, if you do have any questions, please feel welcome to sort of post them in the chat, and we'll sort of look to cover them off at the end of the call in the Q&A session. So without further ado, we'll move into the agenda. Which is next slide, please. So in terms of the agenda today, we'll start off with a quick introduction, introducing you to the presenting team and a few slides on the Business Climate Challenge. I know many of you are familiar with the Business Climate Challenge and are in the process of receiving energy audit reports, but I'm also aware that sort of some businesses here today are maybe not as familiar, so we'll be looking to cover that off. We'll then move into sort of presenting technology-focused slides, focusing on LED lighting, heat pump technology, building management and controls, building fabric improvements. And these slides will be covering what each technology is, key considerations for implementation, and also we'll be presenting some case study examples. And this will be followed by a section on funding, and the section will focus on some of the grant funding opportunities that are available through the London Borough of Brent and Camden to support with implementing energy efficient technologies. And as mentioned previously, we'll end with sort of a quick Q&A session, about 10 minutes, where businesses will be able to ask any of our presenters any questions about the content that's been covered today. Perfect. So moving on to the next slide. In terms of the presenters that we have today, so we've got Abby Roberts, who heads up the Climate Alliance at Camden, and many of you may have interacted with Abby on your BCC sort of journey to date, and has sort of been spearheading some of the activity on the programme. We also have Tenor and Townsend, and myself, Ryan, and Imogen on the call. So a quick introduction to my background. I've worked in the energy efficiency sort of sector for the last sort of decade or so, and sort of have been supporting with some of the activity on the programme and leading the programme management side of the BCC programme with the Camden Climate Alliance. We also have Ryan Smith and Imogen Stewart Green, who are some of our auditors at Tenor and Townsend, who are actually supporting with the programme and supporting with energy auditing activities as well. So that's a quick introduction to everyone on the call today. Next slide, please. Before, sorry, the presenting team, yeah. So before we launch into the main body of the presentation, we thought we'd start with a short activity. And we've set up a couple of polls actually, which are aimed at understanding why your business is here today and how far along you are on your journey to implementing some of the measures or energy efficiency measures. And you can participate in polls by scanning the QR code that you can see on the screen at the moment. And once scanned, the QR code should then take you to a page where you'll be able to respond to the questions. And if this works as we're hoping it does today, we should be able to see some pretty instantaneous results, which I can bring up on the screen in the next few minutes. So we do have two questions. The first question is, what brings your business to today's training? And the second question we have is, if your business is planning to implement measures, when do you expect to start implementing one or more of them? So if everyone can have a chance at just scanning the QR code with their mobiles at the moment and just working through the questions, I'll bring up a nice little sort of summary of what the results are showing us. Okay. So okay, I can see results are starting to filter through. We've got 9 out of 9 sort of responses to date so far. Okay. Just give it a minute or so. Okay, we've got more responses coming through. I'll bring up my screen to show everyone the results.
Hello, Sharon speaking.
Bear with me 1 second. Oh, it's just working its way through. Here we go.
That's the main thing I need to do.
Okay. So we've got an even spread at the moment of sort of responses. So we've got some businesses here today looking at sort of starting out and eager to build their knowledge base, and then also sort of even sort of levels of people interested in a specific measure that they're looking to learn a bit more about and looking before they look to implement it, and also sort of some businesses planning to apply for funding and need some more information about how they can go about doing that. So I think we've got quite a few responses in there, about 20 or so. So we'll go into the next question. Should see some more responses. So if your business is planning to implement energy saving measures, when do you expect to start implementing one or more of them? So we can see that we've got quite a few businesses that fall into that 3 to 6 bucket actually, which is really, really interesting. And quite a few also within that 12 months bracket as well. So great to see that lots of businesses and many businesses hopefully that are receiving the energy audit reports are looking at sort of how they can implement a lot of these measures over the next few months, which is fantastic to see. And hopefully the training today will give you some more confidence and more information about how you can go about sort of doing that in the next few months as well. We've got some more responses. Oh, fantastic. We've got 5 which are under less than 3 months as well, which is fantastic to see. Great. We've got 20 responses. We'll just give it another few seconds just to see if we get any last minute additions to this. Great. Okay. Fantastic. Right. So I'll just close that off for now. And Imogen, if you can sort of bring up the slides. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Really, really sort of useful to see where your business currently sits in terms of implementing measures. And hopefully the training today will provide you, as I mentioned, more information about how you can go about doing that. Fantastic. So moving into the purpose of today's training session, we've broken this down into sort of 4 key items for you today. The first item is sort of looking at helping fostering sort of an understanding of how technologies, including LED lighting, lighting controls, building management systems and heat pumps, and building fabric improvements can help save you energy. Understanding how to plan energy saving improvements to your building, whilst also sort of learning a bit more about how you can go about delivering energy saving projects in your building as well. And then finally sort of running through some of those funding opportunities that exist for supporting you on your journey to installing some of these technologies. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to hand over to Abby, who's just going to run us through a few slides on the BCC programme.
Great, thanks, Kasim. Hi, everyone. My name is Abby Roberts, and I lead the Camden Climate Alliance, and I'm overseeing the overall management of the Camden and Brent Business Climate Challenge programme. Brilliant to have so many of you on the call today, and especially those that are moving through the programme, many of you which have received your recommendation report, or if you haven't received that yet, you've been audited and you're waiting for that report. You may be familiar with myself or our delivery partners, because we are partnered with Brent on this programme, as well as the Fitzrovia partnership. So So you may have had comms from Susanna, Jide, Danica, Stella, or Miranda. The list goes on. There's a brilliant team behind this program. But essentially, our program is helping businesses to reduce their energy consumption from their buildings. And the clue is in the name, the Camden and Brent Business Climate Challenge, challenge being the operative word. And for those that are taking part in our full program and receiving the audit and report, from that point that you receive your report, we're challenging your business to reduce its energy consumption by 10%. And that's through a combination of no to low cost measures, all the way through to some more intense, deeper retrofit measures, some of which we're going to talk through today. But just to reflect on what we've seen through previous iterations of this kind of program, we have seen some fantastic savings realised by businesses. And in the pilot phase of this program, businesses saw an average of 16% within the first 9 months, which translated into just over £8,000 in costs. And then from the scale-up program, which took place a few years ago, within the first 9 months, we saw businesses well on their way to achieving that 10% reduction. And within Camden alone, we actually had 5 businesses that exceeded this target, seeing energy savings between 20 to 32%, which is really, really fantastic. So we're really excited to be working with businesses on this program and helping you to reduce your energy consumption. And I would say for businesses that haven't been interacting with our full program but have been dipping into the trainings, what a fantastic time to also think about challenging your organizations with a target such as this, or something a little bit more ambitious but still feels somewhat achievable. So that provides the context for our program and what we're really striving to help businesses deliver. If we jump to the next slide, that would be brilliant. And just a recap of where we are in this journey. So many of you would have submitted your applications earlier on this year. We went through the process of onboarding you and getting your energy data and some information about your buildings. And in the background, our fantastic team were baselining that information and establishing information before coming to your site to deliver an audit. And we're now moving through into this phase where audits are being delivered, we're continuing delivering our trainings, and reports are being issued. And that is with a view to recognising all of our businesses on the programme around March time next year, to really celebrate and take stock of the impact that the programme's had and the action that businesses are taking. So that is just a summary of where we are. I will then shift to the next slide, and I might be handing back over to Kasim.
Thanks, Abby, and thank you for that introduction to the programme as well. So many of the businesses on the call today will have received or may be in the process of receiving an energy audit recommendation report, similar to the one that you can see on the screen at the moment. And what the report does is that it follows a 6-step process for achieving operational net zero emissions, aligning to the UK Green Building Council's net zero carbon framework. The steps include looking at baselining emissions and energy use and establishing reporting and disclosure processes for that information, looking at ways to improve operational efficiency, before then looking at methods for transitioning from fossil fuel heating systems to low carbon heating systems, then looking at ways of generating clear energy on site, typically with the use of technology such as solar PV, and then finishing off with the procurement of renewable energy tariffs, and also offsetting any residual emissions that are not possible to replace or reduce as a result of the previous 5 activities. And whilst this slide is referring to the report, the reports that are being delivered through the programme, these 6 steps are universally applicable to any organisation that is looking to transition to a net zero operational emission status. And for this reason, much of the information that's being shared today will still be relevant, even if you've not registered to receive a report as well. So that's just really important to mention that these are universal steps that many businesses can take to achieve that net zero transition. Next slide, please. And what this slide does is just break down those 6 steps further to show the key sort of measures and recommendations that fit into each bucket. So we mentioned the baselining of your emissions, so looking at energy data, looking at where your energy is being used, and then sort of profiling how that sort of correlates to carbon emissions as well, giving you a starting point in terms of understanding how much you're consuming and where you might want to target energy reductions going forwards. You then look at improving operational efficiencies and looking at ways to reduce the amount of energy that you use on site and reducing demand on site. And this goes all the way from looking at no to low cost measures, such as changing set points on heaters or air conditioning units, all the way through capital investment projects such as LED lighting and replacing glazing in your buildings. And very much the aim of this bucket is to reduce your energy consumption as much as possible before you then move into the third bucket, which is looking at how can you transition to low carbon heating sources, and looking at ways to do this, including replacing existing boiler units that are running off gas or oil and replacing those with heat pumps, for example, that run off low carbon electricity, and also looking at how you're sort of powering hot water demand at site. So if you're using gas heaters or gas boilers to do that, can that be replaced with electric point of use heaters or electric hot water systems? And we'll go into a bit more detail later on in the slide deck about that. Then sort of once you've sort of looked at transitioning to a low carbon heating source, looking at how you can be self-sufficient in terms of generating some electricity on site or some power on site to sort of complement some of the other sort of activities that you may have already done. And that includes sort of considering items such as solar PV installations on roofs. And then the final buckets are looking at ways that you can sort of procure renewable energy tariffs, but also offsetting any residual emissions that remain once all the other activities are completed, and looking at carbon offsetting schemes and purchasing carbon offsets potentially from those schemes to offset residual emissions. Thank you. Next slide. And this is just an example of how the recommendations show in the energy reports, energy audit recommendation reports that are produced by the programme. We focused here on sort of one particular item, which is the LED lighting example. And what the audit does is that it sort of provides an estimated cost for implementing the measures, as well as the estimated energy and carbon savings and financial savings as well as sort of showing what the payback period is likely to be based on those estimated costs. And that this very much allows you to visualize the cost, carbon, energy benefit of each recommendation, and allows you to sort of understand how you can prioritize the delivery of those measures over a period of time. Next slide, please. And in the report, what you'll find is linked to those recommendation tables is usually a more detailed summary, which provides you some more context around why a particular measure is being recommended, the impact that measure is going to have, some key considerations that your business might need to make when trying to sort of install some of these technologies as well, and also looking at how to sort of implement best practice. So for lighting, looking at ways of how you can incorporate presence sensors or lighting controls to ensure that when you're sort of transitioning to a more energy efficient solution, can we also find ways to sort of control that technology better than maybe perhaps how it was being controlled beforehand. And again, you'll notice that the savings and the financials are presented in a very visual friendly way to sort of summarize the key sort of carbon cost saving metrics, as well as sort of payback periods on the measure itself. Next slide, please. Great, so I'm now going to hand over to Imogen, who's going to run us through the LED lighting focus section.
Yeah, thank you, Kasim. So I'm going to go over the LED lighting section today. So I'm going to start by going through some different types of lighting. So there are 4 main lighting types. We have the incandescent light bulb, which you can see in the picture in the bottom right. We also have the compact fluorescent light bulbs, which is like CFLs. These are normally like tube lighting, and they tend to have quite a low wattage. And then we have the halogen lighting, which tends to be quite like a bright white light. Again, this is quite a high wattage. And then we have the LED lighting, which are they're highly efficient and they have a long lifespan. And now I'm going to go through some ways that you can control this lighting. So I'm going to go through two different ways today. So the first one is dimmers. So dimmers are essential to help adjust the brightness of lighting. So they allow you to control the indoor lighting and can be operated manually with timers or with sensors. And essentially they help to reduce the output of the light, which helps you save energy. And they're quite inexpensive, and for certain types of light, they can increase the lifespan, but with the incandescent lighting that I showed in the previous slide, reducing the output actually makes them less efficient. So probably not the best solution for that type of lighting, but with LED lighting, dimmers can be used, but it's important that you check that they can actually be used for dimming. This can tend to be found on like the packaging of the light bulbs. You can also check the dimmer switch when you're buying it, just to ensure that it can handle the wattage of the light that you're connecting it to. That's just a good way to find out if you can use dimmers to control your lighting. The second way is using passive infrared sensors. So essentially, these are devices that detect variations in infrared radiation in a coverage area. So this detects the presence of people using the heat emitted. So I'm sure we've all come across these, but when you enter a room, automatically the lights will turn on as they're sensing the presence of a person, and they'll also automatically turn off when you leave a room. So this is really good to save energy as the lights will only switch on when they're needed. And also when you leave the room, they'll just be automatically switched off. So they are quite cost effective and reliable sensors to use. But there are some key considerations when installing these sensors. So firstly, you just have to look at the area that you're putting these sensors into. So you want to make sure there's no barriers or obstacles. You also want to make sure that the angle of the sensor will achieve the maximum coverage, because you don't want an area of your room that isn't covered by the sensor and then you end up entering a room and being in the dark. And then also when you're installing this inside, you can take advantage of the ceilings, because the ceiling would give a very large coverage of the room. And also you can use device drivers. So essentially these are controls that you can use to adjust the detection distance. And now I'm going to move on to lux. So lux is a unit of illuminance per unit area. So when you're switching from the lighting that you have to LEDs, you should use a knowledgeable supplier and contractor. This is because they can help you understand the specific needs for your specific company. So you might need different levels of brightness, so understanding the different contexts. Also, they can understand things like color temperature, which can help create ambience, especially in hospitality spaces like restaurants. And you can also, they'll understand the view of true colors. Again, this is quite useful for things like a hairdresser. They'll also be able to replicate lighting effects. So in things like theatres and venues, when you have quite specific lighting requirements, it's useful to have a knowledgeable supplier for this. Payback. So the payback for installing LED lighting tends to be around 2 to 3 years, but there's just some important things to note. The sale of halogen lighting was actually banned in the UK from September 2021. And also, after 2024, T8 and T5 CFL light bulbs are no longer available. And these are the most commonly used lighting in commercial spaces. So it's quite important to understand that when these get to the end of their lifespan, like what you'll be installing after, an LED is a great option. But there are some considerations for lighting replacement. So firstly, LED lighting has several benefits. They require less maintenance, provide better and more even lighting, and also require less energy. But we do understand that the upfront costs for LED lighting are quite high. So instead of completely replacing your existing lighting fixtures, retrofitting involves updating your current fixtures to accommodate for LED light bulbs. This can be more cost effective because it avoids the need to buy entirely new fixtures. So many LED light bulbs are designed to fit into existing mounting hoods and wiring systems, making the transition smoother, and also can reduce the labour costs that this might cost. Also, if directing mounting isn't possible, retrofit adapters might be an option. These adapters allow LED fixtures to be compatible with a variety of existing mounting hoods. Another consideration, as I mentioned in the last slide, is considering the lifespan. So if your lighting is at the end of the lifespan, you might want to consider upgrading to LED lighting. But if you have quite a long lifespan left, it's just something to consider in the future. Another consideration is whether asbestos might be present. So if your building was constructed or refurbished between 1950 and 1980, you might want to get a inspection of the building to see, which will give you an asbestos register, and this will show you where the asbestos might be present, because this may impact the installation of the new light bulbs. Also, emergency lighting is a legal requirement in most buildings, so this definitely needs to be taken into consideration. Emergency lighting should be incorporated into the existing lighting system just for the safety of the working employees. So this is very important if you're upgrading to LED to make sure that this is considered as well. Now I'm going to go into a case study. So the case study we have today is Studio 274, and this is a hairdresser. And the challenge they face is they wanted to reduce their energy consumption from lighting while also achieving better lighting coverage and color temperature. So they worked with designers and manufacturers to help develop the best solution, and they found that their 40 52-watt fluorescent lighting could be replaced with 35-watt LED panels. And as you can see from the figures in the bottom right-hand side, this was going to cost them around £5,400. But using the London Borough of Brent's Business Energy Efficiency Scheme, they managed to get £3,000, which covered about 60% of their costs. And as you can see, their payback without the grant was 3 years, but with this grant, they managed to get it down to only 1 year and 2 months, which is great. And the result was that the staff working in the store, as well as the customers, gave positive comments about the change. So that's a really good example of installing LED lighting. We just want to do a bit of a reflection. So we'd like you to use the React function to let us know if you plan to implement this measure in the future. So we want you to use the clapping emoji if your business has already implemented this measure. Use the heart if you're planning to implement this measure, and a thumbs up if it's interesting but not really relevant for your business at this time. And now I'm going to pass on to Ryan to go through heat pumps today. Thank you.
Thanks, Imogen. Morning, everyone. Good to see a lot of applauses and love hearts, so we're all moving in the right direction, if not already. So I'm going to touch on heat pumps first of all. Hopefully go away to sort of demystify these, because they're probably either had them installed, have issues with them, or seen some sort of publications about them. So hopefully this will highlight the facts a bit more with it. So touching on what is a heat pump, first of all, the easiest way to say it, and you've probably heard it before, is to say it essentially acts like a reverse fridge. So the heat is absorbed via a heat exchanger. So if you think of an air source heat pump that you probably might have seen before, that extracts heat from the outside air. The heat causes a refrigerant, liquid to evaporate, and changes to a gaseous state. This passes through the compressor, leading to pressure and temperature increase, and then essentially returns to the liquid state and passes heat to the space. So like I say, if you think about a fridge, essentially that's taking the heat from within the fridge, cooling it down. So that's essentially the outside air. And then if you feel the back of a fridge, it's obviously quite warm with that heat being extracted from it. So that heat is essentially passed, whether it's through air or water, into your building, providing heat. Likewise, we can do most heat pumps can do heating and cooling, so it can extract cool air from the outside and work in the same way, providing some cooling to your business as well. So if you move to the next slide, please. So like I say, we've got different types of heat pumps. Air source is probably the most common, and you would have seen that before. Terminology varies quite a bit. Although they're all heat pumps, you might have seen this on your roof or outside a building and think that's your air conditioning unit. That is also a type of heat pump. So like I say, you've probably seen these before and used these before. It's just the medium of which that might vary. So there's a term called coefficient of performance with heat pumps as well, so COP. That's essentially the efficiency. So if you consider a conventional gas boiler, that might be in the region of 80 to 95% efficient. With a heat pump, you're getting between 270 and 350% efficient. So you're getting quite a lot of heat for the electricity you're putting in. So that's where you see the COP of 2.7 to 3.5. That's essentially what that means. A couple of other sources, again, it just varies on your business and access to these heat sources, is water and ground source. They act in the same way. It's just extracting heat from water, if that's a lake or nearby river, and then ground, extracting heat from the ground through boreholes. So it's a lot more intrusive works to actually dig the boreholes, and a lot more expensive to do that as well. When considering the heat pumps as well, like I said, typically they'll use refrigerants to provide the heating to the space. They'll all have different global warming potential, so essentially the nasties that come out of it in terms of greenhouse gases. So they've all got different refrigerants. There's a few different examples here which have lower GWP. Some of them are slowly being phased out as well. So it's just something to consider when you're actually specifying air source heat pumps. Next slide, please. So as well as the different examples of heat sources, it's different examples of heat outputs as well. So first of all, we've got air-to-air heat pumps. So this will typically be your external unit feeding into internal units, providing hot or cold air. So that could be a ducted system that allows for easier control from one central unit. They're less visually intrusive. So ducts are usually hidden behind the vents of a ceiling, false ceilings and so on. Installation can be costly if there's no ducts already. They would require frequent cleaning to avoid accumulation of dust and other particles, and there can be losses through leaks in the ducts as well. So that's the first one shown in the upper right. There's also a ductless system, so essentially just the sort of pipes, refrigerant pipes from the external unit feeding the internal units. Again, you've probably seen these in businesses in the past. They're easier and cheaper to install. They're less intrusive. The location of the internal units can be more flexible depending on the space available. And they allow for more zoned control, so you can have multiple different areas to different temperatures and so on. But they're potentially more visually intrusive, so you'll definitely spot this instead of the ducted system, like I said before. These can only be used for space heating and cooling. A separate system would be required for hot water generation, typically point of use water heaters, electric showers if water demand is low, or a electric hot water cylinder with immersion if the demand is high. Next slide, please. So air to water heat pumps. This is more aligned with your typical heating systems, your more conventional style. So the heated water from the external unit will feed into hot water cylinder or through to the circulation heating system. This is ideal for underfloor heating because it's a lower operating temperature. Normally heating is on for longer, which is the case with underfloor heating opposed to radiators. Radiators themselves, if they are sized on a conventional boiler, and depending on their size, they may need to be upgraded because they're less efficient, but can be less disruptive compared to something like underfloor heating. And then another option is fan coil units. So like that ducted example in the previous slide, the hot and cold water can supply the fan coil units that are hidden in a false ceiling and then provide hot or cold air to the spaces. Next slide, please. So looking at controls, before we get into BMS in a bit more detail, the heat pumps can typically benefit from long operation periods, like I said, from the lower operating temperatures. So most heat pumps are now variable speeds, so their operation is a lot more flexible as well. So the heat pumps are connected to room thermostatic controls They regulate the temperature and the time schedules, and they typically monitor and operate pump operation, flow return temperature, fan operation, defrost modes, and any hot water store temperatures as well. Like I said, heat pumps in larger buildings are typically connected to BMS, something similar to what you see on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. So final considerations for heat pumps. We're not encouraging you to replace a brand new boiler. We're only really saying that when it's an end-of-life boiler, generally after 15 to 20 years, or if the boiler is faulty, it requires extensive maintenance. They will supply lower temperatures than gas boilers can achieve, like I said, so existing infrastructure may not be capable of providing enough heat with the lower operating temperatures. Like I said, radiators may need to be replaced, underfloor heating is ideal, and fan coils is another option as well. When choosing a heat pump, you should also consider the space available in surroundings to determine if it's air, water or ground source, existing infrastructure and any hot water requirements as well. Likewise, consideration should be given to any potential planning constraints, where we would recommend reaching out to your local planning authority for advice, and careful consideration of heat demand is key, as sizing the heat pump can be crucial for efficient operation as well. And we've got a case study here as well. So this is an organisation that upgraded to heat pumps. They are upgraded a 6-storey office building from gas boilers to heat pumps and electric hot water. So as you can see in the lower left picture, some new VRF units installed on the roof, one providing heating for each floor, and 2 electric clarifiers in the basement for hot water, combined with electric point-of-use heaters. So the result was a complete removal of gas usage from the building. They retained the existing heating system, which was fan coil units in this example. It did end up with a very congested rooftop, slightly suboptimal system pipework and ductwork configuration, and there was some disruption in tenant floors, done at least breaks in some cases, which minimises issues, and the cost of electric hot water was minimised by topping up at night through flexible electricity tariffs as well. And again, just a bit of a reflection amongst those dialing in. An applause if you've already implemented this measure or got heat pumps installed. A heart if you're planning to implement the measure, and a thumbs up if you're interested but not relevant for my business. Some reactions coming in. I think it's a bit of a mix for this one, but good to hear. So we're going to move on to BMS and controls as well. Next slide, please. So BMS is just building management software. So it can control energy in all types of buildings. Can be something complex like a hotel, an office, even a small retail space as well. And the next slide, please, shows the different sort of examples. So you do have the more complex examples on the right-hand side that can show sort of operating times. It can show breakdown of air handling units and so on, versus the much more simpler versions on the left-hand side, looking at, again, sort of time schedules or even just a small sort of 24-hour clock. This one's even a bit more developed because it's got some weather compensation, but really if you've got a time clock, that is essentially your BMS. It can also be known as a BEMS, Building Energy Management System as well. So yeah, like I say, it comes in all shapes and sizes. Next slide, please, Imogen. So the controllers receive information via many different sensors. So that could be temperature, presence sensors, like Imogen was talking about with the lighting, air quality, humidity, carbon dioxide, and that then feeds into the BMS, and that can control a range of different outputs. That could enable plant on and off. It could change the control water temperatures for the hot water or heating, air temperature for the same, could open windows, control lighting and so on. It varies depending on the setup of your BMS. Next slide. So how does it help you? So like I said, when you've got those sort of capabilities, you can control the plant with minimum energy use. So you're really minimizing the heating, the required for anything, ultimately the energy for all the different services within the building. A lot of them that are more developed, you can remotely access to alter and monitor the plant. You can record installation performance. So like I said earlier with the heat pumps, you can see the actual COP, the efficiency of your heating system that you're getting in practice. You can prove the extent of which the system functions as intended. And you've got a bit of a visualization of important KPIs for the building manager. And finally, you can assist with and monitor preventive maintenance tasks. So how can you best utilize BMS to save energy? So this is a small example. So you want to make sure your time controls are set to match the building operating hours, making sure things aren't going on when they don't have to be when the building's unoccupied. The controls set to sensible temperatures that are not excessively warm or cold. All pipework and ductwork is insulated. Any variable speed drives fitted to fans are regulating speed based on carbon dioxide levels, and any sensors, temperature, CO2 or otherwise, are fitted in sensible places. Like I said, this example here shows, this is from the energy consumption. So this shows average energy consumption during the day, so midnight to midnight, different months of the year. So you can see from the graph, electricity kind of comes in about 4 a.m. Roughly at the same time between 4 and 7 a.m. And this is probably due to this having a ground source heat pump, so effectively a longer heat up time, or ramping up time as it's sometimes called. And then things tend to come off, turn off about 6:30 or 7. So you can see right from here, you can essentially use the BMS to potentially bring that heat up time from 4 a.m. potentially to 6 a.m. So it's things like this that you can use the BMS for, and it works really well in tandem with smart energy systems. If you've got some sort of smart energy meter or submeter to report back and update based on those changes. I think we've got one more slide, maybe a case study. Yes, so this is an organisation that optimised their controls. So in 2021, Reed House, a 3-storey office complex, approached us to upgrade an existing obsolete site-wide BMS system. To achieve maximum energy saving, an approach was taken to rewrite the control strategy for the building and install new software. So all existing plant controllers were swapped out for new controllers with a new demand-driven software installed across the whole site. So multiple PIR detectors, again, what Imogen was talking about earlier, and new CO2 monitor sensors were installed to monitor conditions in the offices, and this allowed the main ventilation plant and fan co-units to be run at a setback temperature if areas were unoccupied, while maintaining good indoor air quality conditions at all times. So after a year with the new system in operation, the following feedback was received from the building owners. So depending on the areas concerned, and especially on the fully occupied third floor economies, of between 15 and 30% are being made, which mitigates the increase in the unit cost for both gas and electricity they incurred. So much so that they can foresee a payback of the cost of works within a 5-year period, if not sooner. And I'd just like to highlight, I guess, this is always an example where they've got new controls put in, but a lot of the time your existing controls can just be optimized in terms of schedule or temperatures. So it's a low to no cost measure that can often incur some really good savings as well. And again, this is just an example here showing the sort of dark blue, orange, grey and yellow, the pre consumption, and then that light blue 2023, you can see a drastic saving there. Again, just a reaction from those participating. Applause if you've already implemented the measure, heart if you're planning, or thumbs up if you think this is not relevant. Thank you. And over to Kasim for fabric improvements.
Thanks, Ryan. We've got lots of sort of good reactions coming through, lots of thumbs up and lots of claps as well. So really good to see everyone engaging and finding use of the information being presented today. So we now move on to the building fabric improvement section. Next slide. So we often hear about sort of a phrase called fabric first. So what does that actually mean? Well, when we think about fabric first approaches and heating requirements, what we know is that the temperature of the air will always try to equalize. And what we mean by this is usually if you are heating the inside of a building, it will try to find its way to escape outside if it's colder outside, so that the temperature is in equilibrium. And typically, that, as I mentioned, that movement is from inside a building where it's warmer to the outside where it can typically be cold, particularly during the winter months where you're heating your building. Therefore, heat needs to be pumped in to match the level of heat that's escaping the building. And the concept is that by insulating the building and improving the fabric of the building, we improve the thermal properties of the building envelope, which reduces the amount of heat required to heat the building and also reduces the amount of heat loss from the building at the same time. So you can see from the two diagrams, you've got sort of an example of an existing building which may have low sort of thermal properties or low levels of insulation, and it requires a sort of an hourly load of 10 kilowatts to heat that space, that building. Whereas if you're insulating the building, the heat requirement actually drops to about 6 kilowatts per hour, based on the good sort of thermal fabric conditions of the building. Next slide, please. So when we think about insulation, what are the main types of insulation measures that you can install in a building? Well, there are a number. You can ensure that floors, ceilings and walls are insulated with good levels of insulation. An important and quick win sometimes can be looking at ways to insulate drafts on doors and windows with the use of draft proofing, but also looking at ways to improve glazing as well, which are an important part of your building fabric. So if you have single glazing, looking at double glazing or secondary glazing, and even sort of also considering sort of maybe going to triple glazing as well. But triple glazing can be far more expensive to implement. But these are sort of measures that you can consider when you're looking at how you can improve your building fabric. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So we've got some examples. Yep, we've got some examples of different insulation types. So the first insulation type is roof insulation. So typically you're installing roof insulation directly under the roof or eaves of the roof. And in most cases, a well-insulated roof can result in energy savings up to sort of 15%. So the two images that we've got here are two different types of insulation products that are being installed to the roof. On the left-hand side, you have a fiberglass type of insulation, and these come sort of packaged in rolls. And on the right, we have a rigid foam board insulation, which can be directly applied to the roof, creating an airtight seal with the roof as well. And typically, actually, the board type of insulation sort of offers a better heat resistance compared to sort of fiberglass type of insulation, but there can be a cost markup for doing that. You can get other types of insulation as well, items such as spray foam insulation, which can be applied to the roof as well. And it's important to note that in order to select the most appropriate type of insulation for each building fabric element in your building, you'll need to consider a number of factors. So you need to consider the need for moisture resistance. So in areas prone to moisture, it's crucial that you choose insulation that resists moisture to prevent mildew and mold, which can often be an issue if insulation is poorly installed or poorly selected. So for example, in roofs, rigid foam boards can be better at resisting moisture if the roofs are more prone to high levels of moisture being sort of received. Also looking at cost, so rigid foam boards are usually more costly than fiberglass insulation, so that's something that would need to be weighed up as well. And also looking at installation, so some insulation types are more sort of user friendly, can be implemented with more of a do-it-yourself DIY approach. So things like the rolls on the left-hand side and fiberglass insulation fall probably into that category, whereas other types of installation will require sort of professionals to come in and install that potentially if you don't have existing maintenance personnel who can do that for you. And also looking at sort of on the installation side, considering the areas that you're wanting to install as well, and the maneuverability of the insulation to cover areas appropriately. So if you've got lots of tight spaces or lots of ununiform spaces, using a rigid foam insulation type might not be as suitable compared to a fiberglass insulation, where you can roll and maneuver it a little bit more better in terms of tight spots and unequal sort of areas on the roof spaces. So these are all sort of important considerations that one would need to make when sort of considering which insulation type to go for. And that holds true not only for roof insulation, but also for many of the different other types of insulation that we're going to sort of cover in this section. What's also interesting to note is, particularly with roof insulation, it can be supported in listed buildings, and it's dependent on the type of insulation being installed again, and something to check with your planning authorities if you are looking to implement it. But it is one of the insulation types that is often more well supported in listed buildings. Next slide, please. Okay, so ceiling insulations, or ceiling insulation. Often people sort of sometimes confuse roof and ceiling insulation as the same sort of type of insulation or same type of application, but they're slightly different. And the difference comes in that the ceiling insulation usually refers to insulation that's being installed between the ceiling rafters, as opposed to the eaves on the roofs. And it can also be fitted in suspended sort of ceilings as well. So you've got an example of maybe a more traditional sort of roof setup on the left-hand side, and then a suspended ceiling on the right-hand side. And there are a number of insulation products again that can be installed. So you've got an example on the left-hand side of a spray foam type of insulation type applied to the ceiling, and on the right-hand side you've got more of a sort of thinner board type of insulation which has been applied. What's interesting to note is when you're looking at suspended ceilings, it's important to note that insulation can be more prone to moisture issues if it's not sort of properly managed. Particularly sort of poor ventilation and leaks from pipes can lead to moisture buildup in the space above the suspended ceilings, which can cause condensation and mold growth. And so it's important to ensure that the building is well ventilated overall and that leaks are prevented, particularly in the areas where insulation is being applied. But ceiling insulation can be quite cost effective to implement. Paybacks within sort of 5 to 10 years are sort of visible for this type of technology. So it's sort of also quite good in terms of payback on insulation measures. Some of the other measures that we actually later on refer to have much longer paybacks, and there are specific reasons for that, which I'll go into shortly. Next slide, please. So cavity wall. This slide shows the typical types of wall constructions in buildings, and it's a useful guide when trying to figure out if you do have a cavity within your wall or if you don't have a cavity on your wall. So the image on the top is showing the type of sort of brickwork or patterning of brickwork that usually sort of links or is linked to a cavity wall, and at the bottom you've got a solid wall sort of patterned setup. And the bricks you can see will have more of an uneven pattern, with some bricks laid sideways so that you can see the smaller ends. So that's usually a quick check that you can actually do just going around your building to check whether you might have a cavity or not that could be suitable for cavity wall insulation. Next slide. And again, we've got some pictures here, and this slide sort of shows that this slide shows the layers within sort of cavity wall, external and internal wall, and a void in the middle. So the image on the right is showing that, so showing how the cavity in the center is filled with the material, which then creates sort of a barrier for heat loss. The left-hand side image is showing another type of insulation that can be applied, but is more intrusive. It's a type of insulation called cavity bat insulation, and again is another type of product that can be applied in the cavity. And the image in the center is essentially showing the type of insulation which is called which is a polystyrene bead type of insulation, which links to the picture on the right hand side, just showing how that's then blown into the wall and into the cavity. So again, that type of insulation is less intrusive, can be done and implemented more easily by installers as well. So it's usually also more cost effective compared to the other type of insulation which is shown on the left hand side. Usually it's not acceptable in buildings which are grade listed, so that's something to bear in mind. And again, can have quite favourable payback. Sometimes paybacks within sort of 5 to 6 years can be seen for this type of insulation. particularly if you're sort of looking at things like spraying in that sort of cavity wall insulation as well. Next slide, please. Okay, the next type of insulation that we have is internal wall insulation, and with this type of insulation, the inside of the walls are insulated, and in order to achieve that, usually what happens is that you need to install a stud wall. So you can see on the left-hand side, a wooden stud wall has been set up, and then inside that wall sits the insulation. Typically it's one of the more costly insulation types, particularly because of the additional sort of infrastructure that you need to put inside the building to actually facilitate that insulation being installed. In addition, if you do have sort of items connected to the walls like radiators or pipework, logistically you need to sort of think about how you're going to work around those areas or going to sort of work with those areas to install the insulation. A stud wall, yeah, as I mentioned, a stud wall is usually needs to be introduced, which also impacts on the space internally of the building. So there's another important consideration when looking at internal wall insulation and looking at whether you would like to implement that type of technology. In most cases, it will require planning consent, particularly for listed buildings, because it is changing the look and feel of how the building looks internally. And because of that additional infrastructure that's needed internally to be able to facilitate that install, paybacks are sort of can be quite high, typically over sort of 10 years, compared to some of the other types of insulation like roof insulation or cavity wall insulation, which are maybe less intrusive, require less sort of install work to sort of facilitate the install happening. So something to bear in mind as well. But as a useful point, the internal wall insulation is an effective way to reducing heat loss, reducing drafts through the wall as well. So these are sort of items that would need to sort of be considered in around when implementing or thinking about implementing internal wall insulation. Next slide. Okay, this is the final type of insulation that we're featuring today, but just shows external wall insulation. This is where insulation is applied to the outside of building. So it follows the same principle as internal wall insulation, but essentially you're applying it to the outside as opposed to the inside. It can obviously improve the aesthetics of the building, and also it's fairly good at reducing drafts. And again, as with most insulation types, it's effective at reducing and creating that that barrier to heat loss on the building fabric. As it's externally located and it's altering the external look and feel of the building, in most cases it will require planning permission or planning consent in most types of designated areas, and particularly for listed buildings, depending on your planning authority, it's very unlikely that sort of external wall insulation would be acceptable. Also, another point to sort of mention is external wall insulation can be on the more expensive side as well to implement, particularly when compared to the other types of insulation that we've mentioned. Paybacks of more than 15 years can be quite common. And you'll also need to think about sort of making sure that external wall insulation is sort of properly detailed and installed so that it can trap moisture, so that it can prevent any moisture being trapped in the walls, which could lead to damp. So it's really important to make sure that competent and registered contractors are sort of engaged with in order to do this type of install. Great. Next slide. Great. So that leads us quite nicely onto the next slide, which is sort of talks to the last point that I made in the previous slide, which is finding a competent contractor. So for any work that you do, you'll require a contractor, be it sort of electrical, renewable energy installer, fabric installation, and it's really, really important to obtain a competent contractor that you can trust and that can really deliver a really good piece of work for you. Interestingly, the term competent contractor refers to an individual or entity that can demonstrate sufficient qualifications, experience, and knowledge, and adhere to those sort of health and safety regulations. But in the UK, which is quite interesting, there's a difference between a competent person and a competent contractor. So it's really important to focus in on that point. And particularly the UK sort of government's competent person scheme allows an individual enterprise to self-certify their work and declare it within the building regulations without getting approved from an independent body. So what we'd always sort of recommend as well is to look at sort of some independent bodies online who list competent contractors, because you can sort of then be confident that they've been accredited independently for works. And there are a couple of useful databases that you can access. For electric installations is National Inspection Council for Electrical Installation Contracting, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's NICEIC. And there's a really good website that they have, and you can go online and you can sort of search for local contractors in your area. You also have Finding a Renewable Energy Installer, and the Microgeneration Certification Scheme will also list installers that you can contact, particularly if you're looking at electrical installations, but also renewable installations like heat pumps or solar PV as well. And as good practice, ideally, we'd sort of recommend sort of considering obtaining at least 3 quotations from suppliers. That gives you a really good sort of base to compare value for money against, but also allows you to compare quality and value for money at the same time. We also have a really, really useful guide online, which can be accessed through the link shown at the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. Great. So we now come on to another business reflection. So again, we'd like you to sort of react to this section and let us know if you're planning to implement this measure. So clap for business has already implemented this measure. Yes, if the business is planning to implement the measure for the first time or looking to implement additional fabric measures. And then the thumbs up, interesting, but not relevant for my business. Oh, great. So lots of hearts. I can see lots of hearts coming through, which shows that perhaps quite a few businesses have already implemented some installation or are looking to sort of implement installation for the first time, which is great. Cool. And some thumbs up as well. Great. Okay. I'm now going to pass over to Abby, who's going to run us through the funding section of the slide deck.
Great, thanks, Kasim, and hello again. So if we just move to our next slide. Thank you everyone for engaging with the reflections. It kind of serves 2 purposes really. It allows us to kind of get a bit of a temperature check from organisations on the call in terms of what you're potentially looking at implementing, but I think it's also a really nice kind of peer-to-peer learning exercise so that, you know, the cohort of businesses that we do have on the programme, but also on the call, you again get a feel for kind of the other types of measures that that businesses are interested in implementing. So going back to obviously the kind of poll that we did at the beginning, and some of you are here to learn about the funding, which is brilliant because that kind of sort of tells us that you're looking to implement in the not so distant future, which is fantastic. So to talk you through a little bit about the kind of funding landscape, and I'm going to speak to Camden first, so that's relevant for our Camden businesses, and then going to touch upon funding for Brent businesses. But just to speak to the Camden Climate Fund, first of all. So this is a fund that was set up back in 2017, and we're able to support households, community organisations, but also businesses with grant funding through the Section 106 carbon offset money that we collect through our planning system. So all the developments that are happening in Camden, they have their very own carbon targets, and where they fall short, the planning system collects payments from those developments, and that enables us to then support energy saving projects elsewhere. So that's essentially how we're able to support businesses with a business grant. So through the Camden Climate Fund, we have £10,000 available for businesses to apply for. So an important consideration for this is that there is a match fund requirement to this. So for example, where you may be looking at the installation of a project that may be coming in around, say, £25,000, for example, you would make an application to the Camden Climate Fund. We could award £10,000 maximum, but then you would obviously be required to pay the match, which would be a further 10, and then the top up to £25,000. But it really is kind of a fantastic way to kind of catalyse kind of the implementation of measures, especially where we're in kind of quite an uncertain landscape. And I know from speaking from various businesses that this is kind of a key consideration, especially when kind of navigating those conversations with senior management, getting the buy-in for implementation measures, and also considering the payback period as well. So really pleased that we are able to offer some funding to support with this. So in terms of the measures that we support through the fund, this isn't kind of an exhaustive list, but they cover off some of the measures that we've talked through today, including insulation, LED lighting upgrades, the low carbon heating upgrades too, but also solar PV installations as well. So this funding in particular is aimed at SMEs. Again, there's some requirements here, but really not too extensive. We also require businesses to be a member of the Alliance, which is entirely free to join. But more information around the terms and conditions can be found, and there'll be links that are circulated following this so that you can have a further read. What we are recommending is that where businesses have moved through our full programme through the Camden and Brent BCC, is that if you are interested in implementing some of those measures that have been recommended, to definitely attend your talk through meeting that you are offered as part of this programme. And if you've not had one yet and think you should have done, then get in touch with the person that's emailed across your report so that you can talk through some of those considerations around the measures. Just one thing to note on this as well, just in the last 2 weeks alone, we've actually approved 2 grant funding applications for the business grants. And they actually one of them comes from a business that took part in the Mayor of London's Business Climate Challenge, and we've granted them £10,000 to install a solar PV project. And then another organisation who's actually participating on this programme, they're looking to deliver LED lighting upgrades, and we're really pleased to have awarded funding there as well. We do have also a kind of a case study just to throw in the mix as well from an organisation called Doughty Street Chambers. Again, they took part in the previous Business Climate Challenge, and they accessed £10,000 from the fund, which actually enabled them to install around 96 solar panels, which appreciate is not feasible for kind of all businesses, but given the size of their site, this is what they went on to install. But essentially, the installation will generate around 35,000 kilowatts per hour per year, with cost savings of around 27,000 over a 3-year stretch. So some really fantastic savings there that funding can enable your business to progress with. Just a note on this fund. So the fund as it is currently, the applications will close on Friday, the 15th of November. That's if you're kind of eager beaver, ready to get on and want to kind of implement some measures now. If we move on to the next slide, I'm going to talk you through a bit about that deadline, but also some changes that are going to be coming into the fund. First of all, just to kind of touch upon what the information is that we are looking for as part of your application. We'll be looking for some details about your business, just to kind of justify that SME criteria, but also around the measures you'd like to install, quote for measure, and again, touching upon Kasim's point there around obtaining a selection of quotations just to ensure that you're getting that best value for money. And then as part of that, the estimated savings, both from an energy perspective, but also a carbon saving as well. Again, additional criteria if you are in a listed building or conservation area, we'll need some additional permissions as part of that application. So in terms of kind of that process and walking you through it, again, starting out with reading the business grant guidance, having your recommendation report ready, and if you don't have a recommendation report because you haven't been through the programme, having an EPC ready as well. We also accept that as some form of verification that the measures you're looking to install, are kind of relevant to the building. Then the process would be to obtain your quote for works. And then with that information, completing the application form, and then if successful, we'll award the grant to the business. You will then install the measures, and then we'll ask for some evidence of that before releasing payment to the business. And again, there's a really nice opportunity there for us to spotlight the work that your organisation is doing and share that more widely with other businesses to, again, cultivate that kind of change and information sharing that we all need to do kind of as part of this net zero journey. So as I say, I've included some links here, and we'll be circulating this afterwards so you can follow through on those links. I mentioned that the current round of funding closes on the 15th of November, and not to deter those from submitting an application before then, but we do have a period of time where we'll be closing the fund as we prepare to kind of relaunch in early January with some amendments. And again, these amendments reflect kind of the growing need to support businesses from a financial perspective to deliver on the carbon savings. So there's kind of two kind of key changes that are going to be coming into play here, and they're in the final kind of sort of processes of sign off, so I can't release too much more information just yet. But the amount that is available to businesses is likely to increase by sort of a good amount. So bearing in mind that the amount available currently is £10,000, this will be increasing. And where we are receiving applications from charities, again, we are looking to remove the match fund requirement because, again, taking into account sort of the situation that smaller micro and charity organisations may find themselves in, a match fund may be problematic. So again, we're really looking to support businesses with the financial aspect to retrofit and kind of really encourage implementation of measures. So that is the Camden Climate Fund. If we go to the next slide, I can only apologise that my camera's dipped as well. I'm not sure, I think that's my network, but hopefully you can all hear me. I've been talking a while now, so it'd be a shame if you can't. So a little bit about the Brent for Business Energy Saving Scheme, because we do have some Brent businesses on the call. So Brent is offering funding to businesses that are moving through the Camden and Brent Business Climate Challenge. As it stands, this is an offer for those businesses only. It's unclear whether this may be opened out to other businesses, but as it stands, it's those businesses that have received the audit and recommendation report through our programme. And the funding available here is £18,000 and a slight variation in the match requirement there. So Brent will fund up to 60% of the cost of works, with the remaining 40% coming from the business. And again, similar guidance applies here where Brent businesses are looking to install measures. We're really encouraging you to take up the offer of your talk through meeting with our consultants once you've had your recommendation report issued to you, just to speak through kind of the measures that you're looking to implement, and again identify where potential further support may be needed and welcomed. As I mentioned, yes, this is just for the applicants at present. Brent has also pulled together a supplier sort of framework to identify some relevant local contractors, again, playing into the fact that it would be a fantastic opportunity to connect with local contractors, deliver their works, and really kind of play into that circular element of sustainability. But again, it's worth noting that the due diligence very much sits with the grant applicants to complete all the necessary checks on those contractors before agreeing to deliver any works. In terms of submitting an application for this, the process for doing this is to email business@Brent, as it is seen there on the screen. And one thing to note with this is the timeframes in which the funding is required to be delivered. This is a slightly shorter timeframe, so I would definitely encourage those Brent businesses that we have on the call to act quick if you are interested in implementing measures, as the funding that is providing the capital grants to deliver measures must be allocated and paid by March 2025. So again, that's sort of 6 months or so from now. And obviously these processes can take some time to get buy-in at relevant levels, to obtain quotes and to get the work started. So definitely a more urgent push there for Brent businesses looking to apply for funding. I think that probably summarises the grant funding streams. I will just note as well that for our businesses on the call that are members of the Fitzrovia Partnership, as the Fitzrovia Partnership is a business improvement district that sits within Camden, those businesses do have access to the Camden Climate Fund and could submit an application. For those Fitzrovia businesses, which I think there are a very select few, perhaps on the call or even on the programme, that fall within the Fitzrovia Partnership catchment but sit within Westminster. I believe that there is some funding that has been made available by Westminster Council to help with retrofit upgrades. But if there are any questions, please just drop them in the chat. But I will hand back to Kasim to wrap us up with a bit of summary, and then we'll move into the Q&A.
Thanks, Abby. So just moving into the summary. Next slide, please. So to summarise, there are sort of 6 key steps any businesses can take to operate their buildings at net zero carbon, and there's a diagram on the right hand side sort of just summarises what we covered earlier on in the presentation. And from the presentation today, technologies such as LED lighting, BMS controls, building fabric measures, and can help improve the operational efficiency of buildings and can reduce the energy demand in your buildings. And heat pumps are highly efficient devices and can be used to replace fossil fuel heating, such as heating from gas boilers in buildings. The energy audit recommendation reports that are being delivered through the Business Climate Challenge are helping to do exactly that, which is to identify the measures that businesses can implement to operate their buildings at net zero. And the reports can be used to inform the grant funding applications and make applications to grant funding that Abby has just run through for Brent and for Camden to support on your journey with implementing some of these measures in the near future. Great, next slide. Great. So I think what we've got before we go into Q&A, we have another quick poll for everyone, and we'd just like to do a temperature check to see how everyone's found the training today. So the question that we're posing is, after attending this training, I feel more confident in my understanding of energy saving technologies and implementation. So if everyone can have sort of a quick go at sort of scanning the QR code, you should hopefully come up with that question, and you should be able to sort of be able to respond to it. If all goes to plan. Do let me know if you encounter any issues, or do post in the chat if you encounter any issues, but I can see some responses coming through. I've got 2 so far. 3, fantastic. So I'll keep the QR code just up on the screen just for a few minutes, just for a minute or so, just whilst everyone has a chance to scan the code and respond to the question. So we've got 11 responses.
I think
Great.
I think there's an old I'm just seeing from the chat, I think some of the older questions are coming up and they're unable to access the new question.
Coming up with the original questions, try 3 times high. Oh, okay. Let me just check that. It does sometimes, you can sometimes see that. I think if you're able to just, let me just see, what you may be able to do is just respond to the initial questions again, and it should then take you to the 3rd question, the last question, if you can have a go at doing that. Okay. Great. Well, yeah, we've got more responses. We've got more responses coming through. Okay, fantastic. Let me just bring up the screen and we can sort of share the results. So it's great to see that we've got quite a few sort of businesses in the strongly agree and the agree bucket. So really good to see that people have found businesses have found the training useful today. And yeah, a couple of neutrals in there as well, which is interesting to see. But really good to see that overall we've got sort of a strong stronger uptake in terms of people feeling, or businesses feeling, that it's been a really useful course for them today and training session today. Okay, great. So we've got 20 responses in total. I will just close that down just for now. Great. Imogen, are you able to bring the screen back up? Thank you. So we're now going to, I think, move on to the Q&A session. And Abby, I'll sort of maybe hand it back to you just to sort of help chair this.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks to the kind of commentary that's been coming in throughout the session. It's really helpful to see the kind of questions coming from businesses and sort of having a feel for these maybe considerations that other businesses are also kind of working through. Just to pick up on the most recent question from Sharon around kind of approaching contractors and pulling together a preferred list of suppliers. So given that we are a local authority, we have to tread really carefully here in terms of naming preferred suppliers, just because we can't be seen to be giving preference to any particular supplier or contractor. Brent have made some headway with this, and I know it's something that Camden would aspire to kind of create, but they have pulled together some kind of guidance around kind of local contractors. So it's something that we do get the question from organisations and businesses in terms of where to go and who to use. We do obviously have organisations that have applied for grant funding and gone on to implement measures and have selected certain providers, and we can make the connection with those. So happy to do so. As Cassim mentioned, though, we also have the guidance that's been created on finding a competent contractor, which is linked within the slide deck, but we will also circulate a link to that directly afterwards in the follow-up email. Something as well to note, which I will touch upon a little bit more just in the summary slide before we wrap up for today, is that we are able to offer some additional support to businesses as part of this programme, and we will be collecting, we'll be sending out a form and asking businesses to share where they may potentially require some further support, and that will be an opportunity to flag that approaching contractors is an area, and we can look to perhaps support further in that space, and that will be kind of the consultants that we have on the call today, but also a number of other consultants from across WSP and TNT to kind of work with you specifically around kind of the funding aspect and obtaining quotes and what to look for when reviewing those quotations. Just having a flick through to see if we've got any other comments. For those that maybe didn't see in the chat function, we had a question from Chin Chin, and that was around, can the funding be used to apply for planning applications? So unfortunately not in this case. The funding that we have from Camden has to generate a carbon saving, so we can only utilise it for the install of capital measures, and obviously towards the installation of those measures as well. So funding can't be used for planning applications or any feasibility studies. It is purely for the measure itself. From the Brent perspective, I would need to clarify that, but I would assume that it's very much the same, because the funding is there to help implement the capital measures. Okay, brilliant. I know some people are jumping off. Thank you again for joining us. And again, we'll be following up with some further detail after this. Questions there around the additional support. I will touch upon that once we finish this Q&A session in a bit more detail. But again, we'll summarise how you can access that additional support in the follow-up email. Just a question here, and might pass this one to Ryan, just as you took us through the BEM section of the presentation. And we have a question from Godfrey, and the question is, how can a BEMS reduce energy consumption and cost?
Thanks, Abby. I think that, I don't know if that came through earlier and Cassim did respond, so I'm not sure if you're able to see that, but will provide more control for initially visibility and also control over the system that you're using, if it's heating, cooling, air conditioning, whatever it is. So ensuring they're optimized. If it's running until 8 p.m, it only needs to be 6 p.m, you can reduce that. If it's temperatures, you can reduce the temperatures. If it's heating to 24 degrees when it's quite excessive, you can reduce that to heat to 21 degrees. It's all about optimizing the set points of the BMS, and that can be, like I say, a simple BMS, a simple boiler, sort of 24-hour time clock, reducing it so it's only on between 7 and 9 a.m.
Hello.
Or oh, hello.
Hello. Sí. Sí, Caroline, dime qué necesitas.
All right, I thought that was Godfrey. So yeah, if it's just a 24-hour control, you can reduce it so it's on between 7 and 9 a.m. and 4 and 5 p.m, whatever suits your business. But making sure we're obviously not recommending you reduce the hours excessively. You can reduce them sort of intermittently to say a half hour here and there, to make sure the business performance isn't impacted. No complaints from staff and so on. So yeah, just intermittent reducing of temperatures, operating hours and so on. But hopefully that answered your question, Godfrey.
Thanks for picking that one up, Brian.
No, so I was just going to add as well to my earlier response, it's also a really sort of handy way to centralize your control system as well, because what you might have as an existing setup is lots of localized controls that aren't sort of speaking to each other, but a BEMS control system allows you to operate each of those systems as a whole together in one sort of system, and it gives you that benefit also potentially, depending on the type of solution you go for, to be able to sort of manage that remotely. So if you're away from site, a lot of localized controls that might be set up. So if you've got a separate sort of boiler thermostat or something similar to that, for example, you might only be able to sort of adjust that when you're on site. But if you've got a centralized BEM system, you may be able to access that externally as well when you're not on site, and it gives you visibility across all your plants so that you can make tweaks, as Ryan said as well. So I think that's the added benefit sometimes of having that building sort of management control system in place.
Thanks, Kasim. Given that we are 2 minutes to time, I will just do a last call for any other questions from those on the call. Okay, great. I think we'll then move into our summary, Kasim. And I can't remember if this is me or is this me? I think this might be me.
Yeah, I think this is, yeah.
Okay. I'll hand back to myself. Okay. Yeah, no, additional thanks to our team from Turner and Townsend for talking us through those energy saving technologies today. I hope it has been useful and again really helpful for seeing the reactions throughout today and seeing the comments in the comment section. It's been really helpful for us, and we'll definitely be taking away these reflections. Again, I'm just seeing a couple of questions in the chat around, will the slides be available? Absolutely, we'll be sharing those. As this is a recorded session, you'll also receive a recording of this so you can reflect back on that. Just a few final points to wrap up with a minute to go. I'll be circulating a training feedback form in the follow-up email, but if you do have just a minute or so now to complete, I'm dropping it into the chat for you to complete. We do offer a number of other trainings as well throughout this program. You'll note that we've now completed 3, which is brilliant. And again, special thanks to those on the call that have attended all 3 of these sessions. You know who you are. That's great to see. Our next training coming up is the carbon literacy training, and this is a full day accredited training course. So a really fantastic opportunity to really delve into the specifics of carbon literacy, and also receive a certificate at the end of the day. This is a course that's accredited by the Carbon Literacy Trust, so you will leave that session being deemed as carbon literate, which is a fantastic thing to take back to your organisation. This is a training that has restricted capacity, so I would recommend that if you are interested in this, to register for that soon. Again, a link for that will be circulated after this session. For those businesses on our programme, Please do respond to any outstanding information requests if there is anything outstanding. For those of you that haven't attended yet, an iAgen dashboard training session, we have another session coming up on the 2nd of October. That will be kicking off at 2 o'clock, and Jed, who is the founder of iAgen, will be leading that. Again, details of which will be circulated in the follow-up email. For businesses that have received their report, please do accept the offer of your talk-through meeting. And if you haven't had one and think you should have done, then please get in contact so that we can set that up. Another call to action there for exploring your iAgen dashboard. Please tell us if you are implementing any measures. We want to be able to see the savings in real time and be able to monitor those and really kind of see where that impact is being had and link it directly to measures being implemented. I mentioned further targeted support earlier on. And again, this is something that is for businesses that are moving through our full programme. We'll be circulating a form to collect some information from you if you would like further support in certain areas. Again, this is a limited service and we do have few spaces for this. So if there is anything in particular that you need support on in relation to your energy efficiency and decarbonisation journey, please do return that form as soon as possible so that we can connect with you and establish where best that support might be delivered. Again, a link to that form will be shared in the follow-up email after this session. I think that's everything from me. So apologies to kind of wrap up then with quite a few calls to action. But thank you again for joining us today and being engaged. And it really is brilliant to see so many of you looking to implement measures in the not so distant future. But yeah, an additional thanks to Kasim, Ryan and Imogen today as well for talking us through this training. Thanks everyone, and hope to see you at another training soon. Bye everyone.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye bye.